beneath the merciless sun of 1886, Coyote Wash, New Mexico. Clara May Hollister, a widow hardened by loss, clings to a barren homestead with her children, Eli and Rosie. One dawn, a dying stranger stumbles into their lives, his blood-soaked coat hiding a silver hawk pendant and a dangerous secret. This chance encounter sparks a journey through betrayal, courage, and a hidden truth that could rewrite their fates. Will they find justice or fall to the desert's cruelty? Subscribe now, share where you're tuning in from, and unravel the mystery of a cowboy's past. Will Clara's choice to save him bring salvation or doom? Stay with us to find out. The sun clawed at Coyote Wash, New Mexico in the spring of 1886, a relentless fist of heat pounding the cracked earth until it bled dust. Clara May Hollister stood on the sagging porch of her weathered shack, squinting against the glare. Her hands, calloused as saddle leather, gripped the splintered railing. The wind howled low, spitting grit that stung her cheeks and tangled her auburn hair beneath a faded bonnet. The well had gone dry 3 weeks ago, the last drops sucked into the thirsty ground. Her garden, a pitiful patch of wilted corn and beans, lay dead under a shroud of red sand. The hens hadn't laid in days, and the mule's ribs showed sharper than a butcher's knife. Clara's eyes, sharp as flint despite the weight of 32 years, scanned the horizon. Beyond the warped fence, the valley stretched like a forgotten promise, hemmed by jagged cliffs that glowed blood-red at dusk. Coyote Wash wasn't a place folks chose. It was where they ended up when the world turned its back. 2 years ago, a quarry blast had stolen her husband, leaving her with 2 kids and a debt heavier than the mountains. Now, the landlord's shadow loomed, his ledger as merciless as the sun. Inside the shack, Rosie, barely 8, hummed a tuneless hymn, her small fingers stitching a tear in her patched dress. Her blonde curls bounced as she worked, oblivious to the hunger gnawing at their bellies. Eli, 10 and wiry, was out scouring the gulch for firewood, his tin bucket clanging against his hip. Clara's heart tightened at the thought of him wandering too far. The valley didn't forgive strays, and neither did the men who roamed it. Hard types with guns slung low and eyes that saw too much. The air smelled of sagebrush and despair when Eli's shout cut through the haze. "Ma! Ma! Come quick!" His voice cracked with urgency, boots kicking up dust as he ran toward the porch. Clara met him halfway, her skirt catching on a nail in the fence. "What's got you hollering, boy? You find water?" Eli's freckled face was flushed, his breath short. He thrust out a grimy hand, revealing a silver cartridge casing, its surface etched with a hawk's sharp silhouette near the primer. "Found it by split rock, under a greasewood bush. Ain't like our bullets, Ma. It's fancy." Clara took the casing, its weight heavy in her palm, polished despite the desert's grit. This wasn't a rancher's round. It had the mark of custom work, El Paso maybe, or Santa Fe. Expensive, dangerous. Her thumb traced the hawk, and a chill ran through her, sharp as a winter wind. "Any tracks?" she asked, voice low. Eli nodded. "Some, faint. Dragged, like someone was limping. Didn't follow far. Thought I'd fetch you first." Clara's gaze flicked to the gulch, where shadows pooled like ink among the red cliffs. "You did right. Don't breathe a word to Rosie yet." Eli's eyes dimmed with disappointment, but he nodded. Secrets were second nature in Coyote Wash. You learned young to keep your mouth shut and your ears open. Clara tucked the casing into her apron pocket, its cold metal pressing against her hip. The valley had a way of spitting out trouble, and this felt like the kind that carried blood. By noon, the heat thickened, the air shimmering like a fever dream. Clara was hauling a bucket of stale water from the barrel when hoofbeats rumbled in the distance. Old man Travers, the landlord, rode up on a sway-backed mule, his hat tipped back with false courtesy. He didn't dismount, just spat tobacco into the dust and fixed her with a vulture's stare. "Clara May, you're 2 weeks late on rent. 10 more days, and this patch ain't yours no more." His voice was slow, deliberate, like he savored the words. "Ain't no rain, Travers. Ain't no crops," Clara said, arms crossed, her tone steady as stone. "Give me time. I'll scrape it together." Travers leaned forward, his grin crooked. "Got miners itching for this land, silver veins in them hills. 10 days, widow." He tipped his hat and rode off, dust trailing like a warning. Rosie stepped out, her blue eyes wide. "Was that about the land, Ma?" Clara didn't lie. It was. Rosie's lips tightened, but she didn't cry. Not since the quarry took her paw. Instead, she slipped her hand into Clara's, small but strong. "Then we best pray hard or plant harder." Clara squeezed her daughter's hand, her gaze drifting west, where a storm brewed. Not rain, but dust, red as blood. Trouble was coming, and it wasn't just the landlord. The casing in her pocket felt heavier than ever. That night, Clara sat by the window, the hawk-etched silver glinting in the lamplight. Someone had limped through Coyote Wash, wounded, carrying wealth and secrets. She didn't know who they were, but the desert had a way of unearthing truths, whether you wanted them or not. The desert had a way of unearthing truths, whether you wanted them or not. And as Clara May Hollister sat by the window, the hawk-etched cartridge casing glinting in the lamplight, she felt the weight of a secret stirring in Coyote Wash. The night was heavy, the air thick with the scent of creosote and a storm's distant promise. Sleep wouldn't come, not with that silver bullet in her pocket and the echo of Travers' threat ringing in her ears. By dawn, the valley woke angry, the wind rattling the shack's loose boards like a warning shot. Eli was up before the sun, his boots scuffing the dirt as he slipped out to check the snares near Split Rock. Clara watched him go, her heart a tight knot. The boy was brave, but too curious for his own good. She was kneading the last of their flour into flatbread when his shout sliced through the morning hush, sharper than a coyote's cry. "Ma, he's hurt badly! Come quick!" Clara dropped the dough, grabbed her shawl, and ran, the hawk casing bouncing in her apron like a lead weight. She found Eli crouched by a jagged outcrop, his tin bucket abandoned in the dust. Beyond him, half hidden in a tangle of greasewood and shale, lay a man, face down, his body twisted like a discarded rag. Blood soaked the sand beneath him, dark and tacky, trailing from a bullet hole in his side. His coat, once fine leather, was shredded, caked with grit and crimson. A black hat lay crushed a few feet away, its brim curled like a dying leaf. Clara's breath caught. This was no drifter. The silver spur on his boot gleamed, and a belt of black pearls, smooth as river stones, cinched his waist despite the blood. "Eli, stay back!" Clara snapped, kneeling beside the stranger. His pulse flickered under her fingers, weak but stubborn. Mid-30s maybe, with a jaw sharp enough to cut glass and stubble that spoke of days on the run. His skin was scorched, his lips cracked like parched earth. She brushed dust from his face, revealing eyes that flickered open for a heartbeat, dark, wild, and terrified, before closing again. "He's alive," she muttered, more to herself than Eli. "But not for long if we don't move." Clara's mind raced. Leaving him meant safety, but it also meant death for a man who might be more than he seemed. The hawk casing burned in her pocket. Rosie's voice echoed in her head, soft and pleading. "We don't turn away folks who need us, Ma." Against her better judgment, Clara made her choice. "Help me, Eli. We're taking him home." The boy's eyes widened, but he obeyed, grabbing the man's legs while Clara took his shoulders. He was heavy, dead weight, his blood smearing her hands as they dragged him toward the shack. The sun was a hammer by the time they reached the porch, sweat stinging Clara's eyes. Rosie stood in the doorway, her needle frozen mid-stitch. "Is he dead?" she whispered, clutching her dress. "Not yet," Clara grunted, hauling the stranger inside. "Get water boiling, Rosie, and the rags from the trunk." The girl scampered off, her bare feet slapping the floorboards. Clara settled the man on a straw pallet by the stove, his breathing shallow as a desert breeze. She cut away his ruined shirt, revealing a bullet wound under his ribs, clean but deep, and another gash at his waist, oozing slowly. Working fast, Clara cleaned the wounds with vinegar and boiled water, her hand steady despite the fear gnawing her gut. The man stirred once, muttering something she couldn't catch. A name, maybe, or a curse. His coat fell open, and a folded scrap of paper slipped out, stained with blood and sand. Clara hesitated, then unfolded it. The ink was smeared, but a few words stood clear. El Paso. Ledger. Holt. Truth. Her heart thudded. This wasn't just a wounded man. This was trouble with a capital T, the kind that brought guns and graves. Rosie returned with rags and a tin basin, her eyes wide but steady. "Will he live, Ma?" Clara didn't answer, just pressed a damp cloth to the stranger's forehead. Eli hovered near the door, clutching a stick like it was a rifle. "What if someone comes looking for him?" he asked, voice low. Clara's gaze flicked to the window, where the horizon shimmered with heat and secrets. "Then we keep our eyes open and our mouths shut," she said, like always. As night fell, the shack creaked under a restless wind. Clara sat by the stranger, the blood-stained paper tucked in her pocket beside the hawk casing. She didn't know who he was or what he'd done, but the desert had dropped him in her path for a reason. And in Coyote Wash, reasons came with a price. In Coyote Wash, reasons came with a price. And as Clara May Hollister sat by the stranger's side, the blood-stained paper and hawk-etched casing heavy in her pocket, she knew the cost was rising. The desert night pressed against the shack, its silence broken only by the stranger's shallow breaths and the creak of warped boards. By dawn, the air turned sharp, carrying the bite of sagebrush and the faint promise of rain that never came. The stranger stirred as the first light bled through the shutters, his eyes flickering open, dark as a storm cloud, edged with pain but clear. Clara, slumped in a chair with a damp rag in hand, straightened. "You're still with us," she said, voice low, like she was talking to a skittish horse. He tried to sit up, wincing as the stitches in his side pulled tight. "Where am I?" His voice was gravelly, rough from days of silence. "Coyote Wash, New Mexico," Clara replied, dipping the rag in water. "My boy Eli found you bleeding out by Split Rock. You got a name?" He hesitated, eyes darting to the door where Rosie peeked, her blonde curls catching the light. "Jonah Mercer," he rasped, then coughed, his hand clutching the bandage. Clara's brow furrowed. The name meant nothing, but the way he said it, like it carried weight, made her pause. She handed him a tin cup of weak coffee, the last of their grounds. He took it with a trembling hand, nodding thanks. "You ain't from around here," she said, eyeing the silver spur on his boot, glinting despite the dust. "That bullet in you says you're running from something. Care to share what?" Jonah's jaw tightened, but his gaze held hers, steady despite the fever's linger. "I'm the son of Asa Mercer, cattle baron from Texas. My mother's dead, and I'm after the man who killed her. He's got a ledger in El Paso that'll prove it." Clara's fingers stilled on the rag. "That paper in your coat mentions a ledger and a man named Holt." Jonah's eyes sharpened. "You read it?" Clara nodded, unapologetic. "Had to know what kind of trouble I'm sheltering." he exhaled, slow and pained. Warren Holt was my father's foreman. He forged a will, took everything after my mother died. I got a letter 2 months back, no name, saying the ledger's with a lawyer in El Paso. It's got proof Holt poisoned her. Clara's lips pressed thin. Poison was a coward's weapon, and Coyote Wash had seen its share of cowards. "You believe this letter?" she asked. Jonah's hand brushed the black pearl belt at his waist. "I believe my mother." She was no liar. The morning wore on, the sun climbing like a vulture circling a corpse. Clara sent Eli to check the snares, keeping him busy, while Rosie lingered, clutching a scrap of paper with a half-written poem. Jonah noticed his cracked lips twitching into a faint smile. "You write, little one?" Rosie nodded, shy but proud. "About the stars, mostly." He leaned back, eyes distant. "My mother used to read me poetry. Said the stars told stories if you listened right." Rosie's face lit up, and she scampered off to fetch her pencil, leaving Clara uneasy. A man who charmed children could still be dangerous. By noon, Jonah was strong enough to stand, though he swayed like a wind-bent sapling. He shuffled to the porch, where Clara was mending a broken fence post. "You don't trust me," he said. Not a question. Clara drove a nail into the wood, her hammer's thud sharp. "Don't trust anyone who bleeds on my floor without a good story." Jonah chuckled, then winced, clutching his side. "Fair enough. Let me earn it then." He picked up a splintered board, his hand steady despite the pain, and helped her brace the fence. His movements were practiced, not the work of a pampered heir, but a man who'd wrestled cattle and rope under open skies. As the sun dipped, painting the cliffs red, Rosie approached Jonah with her poem, her voice small but clear as she read. "Stars fall slow, like tears on stone, lighting paths where hearts roam." Jonah's eyes softened, and he folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his coat. "That's worth more than gold, kid," he said. Clara watched, her heart caught between warmth and warning. This man carried grief in his bones, but so did she, and trust was a currency Coyote Wash didn't mint. That evening, a distant howl broke the quiet. Not a coyote, but something heavier, like hoofbeats fading into the dusk. Clara's hand drifted to the derringer in her apron, her eyes scanning the horizon. Jonah followed her gaze, his own hand twitching toward a holster that wasn't there. "They'll come for me," he said quietly. "Holt's men. They don't miss twice." Clara's grip tightened on the gun. "Then you'd better heal fast, Jonah Mercer. I ain't burying you." Clara's grip tightened on the derringer, her eyes locked on the horizon, where Jonah Mercer's warning of Holt's men hung like a storm cloud over Coyote Wash. The dusk settled heavy, the desert's breath sharp with juniper and the faint tang of iron, as if the land itself sensed blood on the wind. By morning, the shack stood quiet, but the air felt wrong, too still, like the pause before a rattlesnake's strike. Clara rose with the sun, her boot scuffing the floorboards as she checked the stranger's bandages. Jonah slept fitfully, his brow slick with sweat, but the fever was fading. Rosie was outside, scattering corn for the hens, her soft humming a fragile thread in the silence. Eli, restless, sharpened a stick with his pocket knife, his eyes darting toward the gulch. Clara felt the weight of the hawk-etched casing in her apron, a reminder that trouble didn't just knock in Coyote Wash, it kicked the door down. Mid-morning, the heat pressed like a hot iron, and Clara was patching a hole in the roof when hoofbeats rumbled, faint but deliberate, from the canyon trail. 3 riders emerged, dust curling behind them like smoke. Their bandanas hung loose, hats pulled low, and rifles gleamed across their saddles. Clara's heart thudded, but she kept her hammer steady, her face unreadable. Eli slipped behind the water barrel, his stick clutched tight. Rosie froze, her bucket of corn spilling across the dirt. The lead rider, a lean man with eyes like chipped flint, dismounted with a swagger. "Morning, ma'am," he drawled, his voice slick as axle grease. "We're hunting a man, wounded, likely limping. Seen anyone pass through?" Clara met his gaze, her hand brushing the derringer hidden in her pocket. "Coyote Wash doesn't get visitors," she said evenly. "Just buzzards and bad luck." The second rider, wiry and twitchy, circled the yard, his boots kicking up red dust. His eyes lingered on the shack's open door, where Jonah lay hidden under a quilt. "That's so," he said, smirking. "A place like this, you'd notice a stranger." Clara's jaw tightened. "I notice plenty. Like how your friend's horse is favoring its left hoof. Might want to check that shoe." The lead rider's smile faded, but he tipped his hat. "You see anything? Tell him Warren Holt sends his regards. He's got business to settle." The third man, silent and broad-shouldered, stayed mounted, his gaze cold and calculating, like a hawk eyeing a mouse. They rode off, their dust trail snaking into the cliffs, but Clara knew they'd circle back. Predators always did. Inside, Jonah was awake, propped against the wall, his face pale but sharp. "Holt's men," he muttered, wincing as he shifted. "They're closer than I thought." Clara crossed her arms, the blood-stained paper crinkling in her pocket. "You're bringing hell to my door, Mercer. I need the truth. Why's Holt hunting you?" Jonah's eyes met hers, steady despite the pain. "He knows I'm after the ledger. It's got signatures, dates, proof he stole my father's land and killed my mother. If I get it to El Paso, he's finished." Clara studied him, searching for a lie, but found only grief and grit. By noon, Jonah dragged himself to the barn, insisting on work despite his wounds. He tightened a loose hinge, his hand steady, calloused from years of hard living. Clara watched, torn between distrust and admiration. "You're no heir," she said, tossing him a hammer. "You work like a ranch hand." Jonah grinned, faint but real. "Been both. Ran from Texas at 16, herded cattle, broke horses, dodged bullets. Ain't no silver spoon in my mouth." His honesty landed like a stone in still water, rippling through her doubts. Rosie, meanwhile, sat cross-legged in the shade, scribbling another poem. "Ma, if Jonah's telling a story, it's a good one," she said, her pencil pausing. "Like the ones you tell us by the fire." Clara's throat tightened. Stories were all they had some nights, tales of hope and heroes to keep the dark at bay. "If you're hooked on this tale, folks," Clara said, almost to herself, "subscribe to hear how it unfolds. Share where you're listening from. Maybe a dusty trail or a city porch. It keeps us spinning these yarns." Rosie grinned, unaware of the weight behind her mother's words. As evening fell, Clara hid Jonah's Colt under the floorboards, its silver etching cold against her fingers. She sent Eli to scout the ridge, his small frame slipping through the sagebrush like a shadow. He returned, breathless, reporting fresh tracks near the gulch. Boots, not hooves, circling back toward the shack. Clara's blood ran cold. Holt's men weren't gone. They were watching. She stood on the porch, the derringer heavy in her hand, the horizon burning red as the sun sank. Jonah joined her, his limp pronounced, but his eyes fierce. "I'll leave if you want," he said. "Keep your kids safe." Clara shook her head, the desert teaching her one truth. You don't run from trouble. You face it. Clara shook her head, the desert's hard truth etched in her bones. You don't run from trouble. You face it. But as the red horizon swallowed the sun, a new fear clawed at her. Eli's cough, sharp and wet, echoed from the shack. The boy's face was flushed, his eyes glassy under the lamplight. Coyote Wash was no place for sickness, not with Holt's men circling like wolves. By dawn, Eli's fever burned hotter than the noon sun. Clara pressed a damp cloth to his forehead, her hand steady, but her heart racing. Rosie knelt beside her, whispering prayers, her small hands clutching Eli's. Jonah, still limping from his wounds, watched from the doorway, his jaw tight. "He needs more than water and willow bark," he said, voice low. "There's an Apache elder, Gray Elk, not far from here. My mother saved his people once. He might help." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You trust him?" Jonah nodded. "I trust his debt to her." The trail to Gray Elk's camp wound through a maze of red cliffs and twisted mesquite, the air thick with dust and the scent of pine. Clara rode their mule. Eli slumped against her, his breath ragged. Jonah led on foot, his Colt hidden under his coat, eyes scanning the ridges for Holt's men. Rosie trailed close, clutching a bundle of dried herbs Clara had packed. The sun scorched their backs, and the wind carried a low moan, like the desert itself was grieving. They found Gray Elk at dusk, standing tall beneath a rock overhang, his braids streaked with silver, his vest lined with bone buttons that glinted like stars. His eyes, deep as canyon shadows, fixed on Jonah. "You wear her face," he said, voice resonant, like stones shifting in a riverbed. "A Lelinor's son?" Jonah nodded, stepping forward. "Jonah Mercer. My mother brought medicine to your village years back. I'm asking for help now. My friend's boy is sick." Gray Elk's gaze shifted to Eli, cradled in Clara's arms, then back to Jonah. "White men come to my land with guns or greed. Why should I trust you?" Jonah stood firm, his hand brushing the hawk pendant tucked in his pocket. "Because my mother didn't ride past your pain. She brought quinine when fever took your kin. I'm not here to take. I'm here to beg." Clara's grip tightened on Eli, her eyes locked on Gray Elk. She didn't speak, but her silence carried the weight of a mother's desperation. The elder stepped closer, his boots silent on the sand. He knelt by Eli, touching the boy's burning forehead, his fingers tracing old scars on his own hands. "Fever from the dust," he said. "It clings to the lungs." He rose, his gaze piercing Jonah. "You seek a ledger in El Paso. You chase truth, but truth is a blade. It cuts both ways. Prove you're not your father's shadow." Jonah's eyes darkened. "My father built fences. I broke them. Test me, and I'll show you." Gray Elk led them to a fire circle, its embers glowing like dying suns. He handed Jonah a knife and pointed to a gnarled juniper. "Carve a circle, deep, without breaking the blade. Do it clean, like your mother's heart." Jonah took the knife, its handle worn smooth by years. He worked slowly, his hand steady despite the pain in his side, carving a perfect ring into the bark. The blade held. Gray Elk nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "You carry her honor." He turned to Clara, handing her a pouch of yarrow strips and pine needles. "Boil these. Let the boy sip slowly. The fever will break by dawn." Then he pointed south, where the cliffs parted like a wound. "The Red Hollow lies there, a path traders and thieves use. It's shorter to El Paso, hidden from eyes that hunt. If you're truly a Lelinor's son, take it. But know this, the desert tests those who walk its secrets." Clara nodded, her voice steady. "We'll take the chance. Thank you." Gray Elk's gaze softened. "Your mother's debt is paid, Jonah Mercer. Mine is not." As they turned to leave, the elder's voice stopped them. "The boy's heart is strong, like yours, widow. Guard it well." Clara met his eyes, a silent vow passing between them. They rode back under a sky bruised with clouds, Eli's fever already easing. Jonah walked beside the mule, his limp heavier, but his eyes fierce with purpose. Clara glanced at him, the yarrow pouch warm in her hand. The Red Hollow waited, a path to truth or a grave. In Coyote Wash, the line between the two was thin as a knife's edge. The Red Hollow waited, a path to truth or a grave. And in Coyote Wash, the line between the two was thin as a knife's edge. Clara May Hollister gripped the mule's reins, her eyes fixed on the shadowed cleft where the cliffs parted like a cracked bone. Dawn broke cold, the air sharp with pine and the faint musk of damp earth. Eli, his fever broken but his face still pale, huddled under a blanket in the wagon. Jonah Mercer walked ahead, his limp easing, but his hand never far from the hidden colt. Rosie clutched her poetry book, her small frame swaying with the wagon's creak. The Red Hollow swallowed them by mid-morning, its walls rising steep and red as raw meat. The trail, barely wide enough for the wagon, twisted through a labyrinth of stone and scrub, the sun a distant slit above. Dust stung their eyes, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the clatter of pebbles underfoot and the mule's labored snorts. Clara's derringer weighed heavily in her apron, the hawk-etched casing beside it a silent reminder of the stakes. Holt's men were out there, and the hollow was no place for mercy. By noon, the heat turned brutal, the air shimmering like a fever dream. Jonah paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and pointed to a cluster of barrel cacti, their spines glinting like needles. "Water's in there," he said, slicing one open with his knife. The pulp was bitter, but it wet their cracked lips. Eli sipped slowly, his strength returning, while Rosie traced the horizon with her finger, whispering, "It's like the earth's bleeding." Clara shot her a look. "Keep your eyes on the trail, girl. Bleeding earth doesn't shoot back." The path narrowed, forcing them single file, the wagon's wheels scraping stone. Jonah's eyes scanned the ridges, where shadows moved too quickly to be tricks of light. "We're being watched," he muttered, his voice low as a growl. Clara nodded, her hand brushing the derringer. The hollow felt alive, its walls whispering secrets in the wind's low moan. They pressed on, the mule's hooves kicking up red dust that clung like blood to their clothes. Dusk brought a new threat. The trail climbed a steep pass, the wagon teetering on the edge of a drop that plunged into darkness. A crack split the air, a rifle shot, sharp and close. Clara yanked the reins, pulling the mule behind a boulder. Jonah dove low, his colt drawn, eyes scanning the cliffs. "Ambush," he hissed. Two men materialized on the ridge, their rifles glinting in the fading light. "Hand over the cowboy, widow," one shouted, his voice echoing like a vulture's cry. Clara's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. "Ain't got no cowboy," she called back, her derringer raised. "Just a family passing through." The second man fired, the bullet grazing the wagon's edge, splintering wood. Rosie screamed, and Eli pulled her down, his small hand shielding her. Clara fired back, her shot clipping the first man's shoulder. He cursed, staggering, but the second charged, his boots crunching gravel. Jonah moved like lightning, his colt barking twice. The man dropped, clutching a shattered knee, his scream swallowed by the hollow's walls. The first man fled, his horse's hooves fading into the dusk. Clara's breath came hard, her arm trembling, but her aim was true. "First time I shot a man," she said, voice flat. Jonah holstered his gun. "Won't be the last." Night fell, cold and starless, the hollow's walls looming like silent judges. They camped under an overhang, the fire small to avoid prying eyes. Jonah skinned a jackrabbit Eli had snared, its meat tough but warm. Rosie, shaken but brave, opened her poetry book and read softly. "Shadows dance where stones stand still, guarding hearts that climb the hill." Jonah's eyes softened and he nodded. "That's the truth, kid. Write it down." Clara watched, her derringer close. the weight of her choice to protect Jonah heavier than ever. As the fire died, Jonah took watch, his silhouette sharp against the cliffs. He spoke low, his voice carrying the weight of years. "My mother taught me the stars once, said they guided men home. Orion's belt. She called it the Cattle King's mark." Eli, curled under a blanket, whispered, "Do they guide us now?" Jonah pointed to a faint constellation. "They're trying. We just gotta listen." Clara met his gaze, a flicker of trust sparking in her chest. The Red Hollow was a crucible, forging them together. But the road to El Paso was still a long, bloody trail. The Red Hollow had forged them together, but the road to El Paso was a long, bloody trail. And as Clara May Hollister's gaze met Jonah's under the starlit sky, a flicker of trust burned brighter than the dying campfire. The wagon creaked into El Paso at dawn, its wheels caked with red dust, the city sprawling like a fevered dream of adobe and timber. The air was thick with gun smoke, creosote, and the shouts of vendors hawking wares under a relentless sun. Jonah's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the crooked porches for ghosts of his past. They headed south, where the town thinned into shacks and the clang of hammers echoed over mesquite fences. Jonah led them to a lean-to of salvaged wood, its roof sagging like an old man's hat. "Ellison Grady," Jonah said, voice low. "Used to be my mother's lawyer. If the ledger's anywhere, it's with him." Clara nodded, her derringer heavy in her apron, the hawk-etched casing a cold weight beside it. Eli and Rosie stayed close, their faces smudged with trail dust, but eyes sharp with hope. Jonah knocked twice, the door rattling. A voice growled from within. "You walkin' or ridin'?" "Walkin'," Jonah replied, "and I need your word, Grady." The door creaked open, revealing a man hunched over a workbench, carving a chair leg with hands steady as stone. His left eye was milky, a scar curling from brow to jaw, but his right eye, green and piercing, fixed on Jonah. "Hell's bells," Grady muttered, tossing his knife into a pile of shavings. "Thought you were dead, Mercer." Jonah's lips twitched. Someone tried hard to make it so. Grady limped to a cabinet, its 3 rusted locks glinting in the dim light. "You're after her ledger," he said. "Not a question." He pulled out a leather-bound volume, its edges cracked but pages crisp, inked with meticulous care. "Your mother left this with me. Receipts, signatures, dates. Proof Warren Holt forged the will and poisoned her to take your father's land." Jonah took the ledger, his fingers tracing the cover like it was scripture. Clara watched, her heart pounding. This was no mere book. It was a fuse to a powder keg. Grady's voice turned sharp. "There's a catch. Holt's in Tombstone, spinning lies in court tomorrow. Your father's testifying for him, thinks you're gone. You want justice, you ride now." Jonah nodded, his eyes hard as flint. "Then we ride." Clara's hand brushed Eli's shoulder, her voice steady. "We're with you." The kids climbed into the wagon, Rosie clutching her poetry book, Eli gripping a stick like a rifle. The ledger lay heavy in Jonah's coat, a promise and a threat. They camped that night outside El Paso, under cottonwoods that whispered in the breeze. Stars pierced the sky like bullet holes, and Clara kept watch, her derringer close. A rustle in the dark made her freeze. 2 men, rifles raised, stepped into the firelight. "The ledger, Mercer!" one snarled. Jonah's Colt flashed, a single shot dropping the man in a heap. The second fired, grazing Clara's arm. She staggered but fired back, her bullet finding his leg. He screamed, collapsing as Jonah stood over him, gun steady. "Tell Holt I'm coming," he said, voice cold as iron. The man crawled away, leaving blood and silence. By morning, they reached Tombstone, a town scarred by gunpowder and greed. The courthouse loomed, its brick facade too proud for the dust it stood on. Inside, The trial was underway. Asa Mercer sat in a wheeled chair, his once mighty frame shrunken, his eyes cold as winter. Warren Holt stood tall, silk vest gleaming, but sweat betrayed his calm. His lawyers, slick as snakes, waved forged papers. Jonah strode in, the ledger under his arm, Clara at his side, bandaged but unyielding. The crowd hushed, and Asa's gaze locked on his son, disbelief cracking his stone face. Judge Bellamy Withers slammed his gavel. "Who are you?" Jonah stepped forward. "Jonah Mercer, son of Eleanor and Asa Mercer. This ledger proves Holt's lies." Holt sneered. "He's a fraud. Jonah died years ago." Rosie, small but fierce, stepped up, holding her poem. "This is mine," she said, voice clear. Jonah kept it. It's like his mother's letter. Same heart, same truth. The judge compared the poem to Eleanor's letter, his brow furrowing. "This girl ain't lying," he said. Asa's hands trembled, and a tear held back. "My boy," he whispered. The ledger's pages, laid bare, sealed Holt's fate. Fraud, murder, all in black ink. The gavel fell, and marshals hauled Holt away, his curses echoing. Clara stood beside Jonah, her wound throbbing, but her heart steady. The truth was free, but the cost was written in blood and dust. The truth was free, but its cost was written in blood and dust. And as Clara May Hollister stood beside Jonah Mercer in the shadow of Tombstone's courthouse, her bandaged arm aching, she felt the weight of a new beginning. The wagon rolled back into Coyote Wash, under a sky bruised with clouds, the valley unchanged, still dry, still clinging to the edge of nowhere like a half-whispered prayer. But the air felt different, softer, as if the desert itself exhaled relief. Jonah stepped down, his boots crunching red sand, his eyes tracing the land where he'd nearly died. Clara drove the mule, her hand steady despite the wound's dull throb. Eli and Rosie sat in the wagon, their faces smudged with trail dust, but lit with quiet hope. The shack loomed ahead, its sagging roof and warped boards a testament to their struggle. Jonah's hand brushed the hawk pendant in his pocket, a silent vow to build something honest. "We start here," he said, voice rough but firm. Clara nodded, her derringer tucked away, no longer needed, but never far. They began at dawn, the sun a pale disk behind the cliffs. Jonah, stronger now, hauled lumber from a wrecked barn 2 miles off, his limp barely noticeable. Clara dug the well deeper, her shovel biting into the cracked earth, sweat mixing with hope. Eli followed Jonah like a shadow, learning to drive nails straight, his small hands calloused but eager. Rosie painted a sign with careful, crooked letters. Morning Star Ranch. The name wasn't just a marker, it was a promise, carved from the desert's heart. By noon, the heat pressed like a blacksmith's forge, but they didn't stop. Jonah sold a parcel of his father's land near Pecos, the money-buying seed, tools, and 2 sturdy mules. Clara planted corn and beans, her fingers coaxing life from soil that had forgotten how to yield. The hens, sensing change, laid again, their eggs small but steady. Eli rigged a snare, catching a jackrabbit, his grin wide as the horizon. Rosie wove wildflowers into chains, draping them over the fence, their petals bright against the dust. One evening, as the sun bled red across the Dragoon Peaks, Jonah stood on the porch, holding a velvet pouch. Inside was a silver necklace with a single obsidian pendant, its surface smooth as a still pond. "My mother's," he said, voice low. "She wore it when she married my father. Said love should feel like truth, not thunder." Clara's breath caught, her eyes meeting his. He knelt in the dust, no ceremony, just grit. "Marry me, Clara. Let's raise this place, these kids, together." Eli stood tall, grinning, while Rosie clutched a bouquet of sage, whispering, "Say yes, Ma." Clara's lips curved, not a tear, but a nod. Yes. A month later, under a sage-wrapped arbor, they spoke vows to the wind and the land. No preacher, just the desert as witness, its silence sacred. Jonah placed the necklace around Clara's neck, its weight light but sure. She gave him a ring, a silver coin flattened by a Tucson train, its fit perfect. Eli and Rosie stood close, their hands linked, their eyes bright as the morning star. The sun sank, painting the valley gold, and Coyote Wash felt alive, its pulse beating in their calloused hands. That night, Eli brought a paper, his handwriting unsteady but clear. "Rosie and I have been talking," he said, voice firm for a boy of 10. "We want your name, Jonah, but we're keeping Hollister too, so folks know where we came from." Jonah knelt, his heart full. "You'll always be Hollister's," he said, "and always mine." He signed the papers under lantern light, naming them Eli Hollister Mercer and Rosie Hollister Mercer, binding them in ink long and love. Clara's last planting wasn't crops, but morning glories, their blue and violet blooms curling up the fence posts, reaching for the sky. Each dawn they opened, fragile yet fierce, folding gently by dusk, as if whispering to the earth. Jonah watched them from the porch, hat low, coffee strong, his past a shadow burned away by the desert's light. He'd been rich once, land, cattle, a name. But here, with 3 hearts beside him, he found wealth that didn't rust. The sign creaked in the breeze. Morning Star Ranch. The valley, once a grave, now cradled life. The desert had taught them to survive, but love taught them to bloom. Clara took Jonah's hand, Eli and Rosie laughing as they chased a stray hen. Under a sky scattered with stars, they stood together, not just survivors, but a family, rooted deep in Coyote Wash's hard, honest earth. The tale of Clara, Jonah, Eli, and Rosie in Coyote Wash weaves a rugged tapestry of grit, truth, and chosen family. What did their journey stir in you? Did the desert's lessons or their hard-won bonds hit home? Share your thoughts. Wherever you're listening from, your voice adds to the firelight. We're grateful for your joining us under these starry skies, riding alongside their struggle and triumph. Stay close to the trail. Another story's brewing in the dust. We'll meet again by the next campfire, where the West whispers its secrets. Until then, keep the stars in sight and your heart open.